Okay. Welcome, everyone. I've been having such a great time with the lecture series. In the fall, we did one on birds, the birds of Orange County, and we'll repeat that this coming fall. And then in the spring, we had done kind of all wildlife, and not only the ones we have in our area, but where they came from, their fossil history. And then that ended. And then I kind of thought, well, summer's here. And so there's so much to say. So I kind of thought maybe try two series and see how this goes. Now, one of them, and I know this is a tiny bit disjointed, I teach a lot of anatomy to like the nursing classes, et cetera. And so I thought, like, hey, people are interested in the human heart, the human brain, blood, et cetera, for a lot of reasons, including, sometimes we're in a doctor's office for ourselves or for a loved one, and, there's terms being thrown around, and just having a little bit more of a context would just, be better for everyone involved. So that was kind of the motivation for that. But also over the course of the year, we've been focusing on local wildlife. But we live in a global, society. Like our birds, a lot of the ones we see, well, they were in Brazil over the winter, and now they're in Canada. And so, talking about ecological issues, just worrying about Orange County is limiting in a way. I'm just going to shut this door first. And so the summer series that we were looking at is that not next Monday, because that's the holiday, but following that, we'll have 5 weeks of kind of wildlife in other places, and just, like looks at national parks out west, national parks in the Caribbean. Wildlife of the Galapagos on June 2nd, wildlife of Latin America, June 9th, the Everglades, the Caribbean, and coral reefs on June 16th, the geological history and biological diversity of the U.S. Southwest on the 23rd, and a musical evening with nothing but songs with wildlife, with videos behind us on the 30th, 10 plus instruments. You'll laugh, you'll learn, you might sing along. And then following that, we're doing the biology of gender today, which is kind of in the anatomical realm. But then in July and August, a few more anatomical things: human blood and blood tests, the human heart and the ECG, human brain and behavior, and then a couple of other systems like respiratory, et cetera. So that was the plan for the summer. Did anybody have any questions before we begin? If you're at home, we're in a fancy new room. Chairs are more comfortable, a little more room. This is room 110. And so we'll be Zooming all of these and recording these. But if you ever want to stop in person, rally room 10 from 5:30 to 6:30. Any questions before we begin? Okay, so gender. Gender had no place in the history of our planet for a third of the history of life, because bacteria don't have sex. All right, they just reproduce asexually. So no sex for 1.5 billion years. So then obviously no gender. That would be the red period in Earth's history. But come the green period now, there were finally cells with nuclei. Not animals yet. That wouldn't appear till the yellow. All right, so we could call these protists, for lack of a better word. They were having sex. Where did sex come from? Don't know. One of the reasons I don't know is the most primitive protist alive today that we can find is Giardia. Giardia doesn't have sex, so there are nucleated cells that never have sex, but it has some of the genes for sex. So what that means, like, did its ancestors have sex and then lose the ability, or are we watching like a precursor where you have some of the components but not yet enough? So that's interesting. Plus, I mean, even going into the bacteria, one of the most important proteins for sexual reproduction in humans, welcome, is called Rec-A. Bacteria have it. So bacteria, they don't have sex, but they have one of the most important genes for sex. That would be a different, topic of the lecture. So clearly, like, the components of sexual reproduction got built over time. Now, once organisms start having sex, are there like males and females that produce, flagellated swimming sperm and then large non-motile gametes? Well, some do. But then there's, oh, come on, oh, no, that's not the video. I'm sorry. I want another video. These protists, they have kind of weird sex, a lot of them. So we are not, I want to spend most of this time talking about humans, but just kind of introduce just some of um, the diversity. Somewhere. Anyway, so when paramecia have sex, there can be more than two mating types. And when they have sex, they exchange like micronuclei and macronuclei. I'm sorry, this isn't even the right video either. Anyway, so their sex is complicated. All right. So when sex appears, it's not as if it's just one thing. And then even when you look at like moths, all right, like so when I think of haploid cells, I think of sperm and ova, they're just for sex. But when like moths make haploid cells, the green stuff, that's all haploid. So like for our understanding, it's as if like sperm and ova grew up to be people, and then they made sex cells, and then when those sperm and ova people had sex, that then became the diploid organism. So there's just weird stuff going on um, out there. But getting specifically to gender, if you're going to have opposites contributing genetic information, how do you then say, all right, you're going to be, this category versus that category? Well, with us, we think, well, wouldn't there be sex chromosomes like XX and XY, right? Uh, Not at first. So, for example, most reptiles use the temperature of the nest. So, if I give you a whole bunch of turtle eggs and you split them among you and a friend, and you take them to your house, and your house is a little cooler, and your friend takes it to their house, and their house is a little warmer, then one of you will have then all females, and one of you will have all males. All right. Um, Gender can be determined by temperature. In bees, yeah.
What's the advantage of that?
I don't know. Because obviously, like climate change, and et cetera, would be difficult. Climates have gone up and down. So now the female has to like monitor the depth of the nest, et cetera. I don't know that necessarily there's an advantage per se, as much as it just takes sex chromosomes and that mechanism, a genetic mechanism, a while to kick in. So half reptiles do, and I just kind of see it like maybe temperature was like the first one, and then along the way it's like, ooh, sex chromosomes would be a little bit better, and then so that was an improvement on the original. That's how I see it. But that's a good question. I don't. Yeah.
How sensitive is the temperature? It's what, 1/10 of a degree, 9 degrees?
I think it's like a couple of degrees, but it's sensitive to the point where like back in the day, I'm old, I remember this, where like people would like rescue sea turtle eggs and they dig them out of the nest, and they'd like, because people use this beach, and they'd like put them to some other beach where no one goes to. Unfortunately, they might have made like all male populations out of that. So just the transport would have changed it a couple of degrees. So um and I don't want to speak in general because it's most turtles, it's about half of snakes. So it might be different from this one for that one. So there are variations, like in this species, the warm ones become the females, the cold ones become the males. Then there are other species where it's the same, other species where it's the extremes or one gender. So it's not one simple, one size fits all. But then there are the sex chromosomes. All right, if you get this chromosome, you're male. If you get this chromosome, you're female. So we're familiar with that. We're getting to humans in just a second. But there are variations. So flies have X and Y chromosomes. It's a little bit different though, because the Y chromosome doesn't carry maleness. Instead, it now affects the ratio of the sex chromosomes to the autosomes. So that's what's determining gender, not the presence of the Y, but the ratio of X's to the non-sex chromosomes. There are some chromosomes which determine one gender, so for example, in I see a chat. Is that a problem with temperature? So yes, it potentially could be. As far as the temperature gets warmer, because a lot of the nests are buried, that might offer some protection. And this would then inquire, like, if you were to study water snakes, for example, in a warmer year versus a colder year, was there, a disadvantage to that? I don't know that. I haven't read that research, but that would be very interesting. I know some people back in the day were even wondering, if dinosaurs were kind of like that, in mass extinction events, like if you drastically change the temperature of the planet, would that affect them? I'm not quite sure I buy into it, but just a lot of people have asked that very question, and I'm sorry, I don't know a good answer to. In humans, the males are XY, having two different chromosomes. The females are XX, having two of the same. So heterogamic, hetero meaning different, X and Y for males. Homogamic, meaning two X's all over get an X for females. But in birds and butterflies, it's the opposite. All right, where it's the females which have two different ones and the males which have two of the same. This, I personally think, but I've never been able to track it down, having two different ones, especially if one's smaller, means you're probably more likely to die. So for example, this is another lecture, but for every 100 female fetuses or 100 female embryos conceived, there are 130 males. At conception, males outnumber females. But most miscarriages are male and most infant deaths are male. By the time you get to puberty, it's a 1-to-1 ratio. All right, so because this Y chromosome doesn't have as many genes to offer a backup for a mutation, the ones with the shorter chromosome are likely to suffer more from mutations. If you look at ducks, male ducks outnumber females. There are just fewer females around. And there are probably multiple reasons, like females have all of the burden of caring for the young. But I think that that also could be a reason if, once again, now females are going to be more vulnerable to mutations because they don't have two bigger chromosomes for a spare copy. So with that, there's some variations, just a couple last ones. A lot of fish, all right, like parrotfish are big on this. You're born female, all right, and then you may become male later in life. All right, so that you will be both male and female during the course of your life. But then each species can vary, where in some species all the females eventually become male, in some only some of them do, and it depends. Like if the male that has a harem of female fish dies, then that will trigger one of the females to then become male. So gender, can be a little bit more complicated in the biological world. Obviously, a lot of, that would be a separate conversation. I would like to spend a lot of time talking about humans. So with that in mind, at conception, what typically happens is that our sex cells are haploid. So in other words, while a female, like in this room, cheek cells, brain cells, bone cells, have two copies of the X chromosomes. The sex cells have one or the other, but not both. So the term we use for that is haploid. Sex cells are haploid. So male cells have X's and Y's, and brain cells and bone cells, et cetera. But when they make sex cells now, the sex cells have one of the two X's in an ovum, or an X or a Y in the sperm. So there are two kinds of sperm. One carry an X, one carry a Y. Which fertilize the egg determines XX or XY. And so, out of the many reasons we could be upset at, those medieval kings who would like divorce their wives because they weren't bearing them sons, woman really didn't have much to do with it. She's always providing an X. It was which of the sperm fertilized the egg, the X or the Y, that was determining it. But once again, another conversation. All right, so chromosomal gender has been now established in that in this little diagram, half of the embryos have received an X chromosome from their father and an X chromosome from their mother. They are XX, chromosomally female. Half have received a Y chromosome from their father and X from their mother. They are XY, chromosomally male. Does it always happen that way? It doesn't. And that's because of what's called non-disjunctions. So when I say, there's the stages of cell division, and there comes a phase where half the chromosomes you go this way, half the chromosomes you go that way. It usually works out like that, but it doesn't always. Sometimes the two, instead of separating, two go left and none go right. And so now, if you look at ovum, not all ova have an X chromosome, all right? Not all sperm have an X or a Y. Or maybe this ovum has two X chromosomes, or has an X and a Y. So when it then comes to conception, all right, there are other possibilities. So So I go through it in this video and the next video here. So there is a syndrome known as having Turner syndrome, where you receive one X only. So you're female, because in humans, let me talk about chromosomal gender. This is complicated, so I'm just going to take it one step at a time. Chromosomally, the presence of the Y is determining maleness. Not having a Y is determining femaleness. So Turner syndrome females would have an X only, either inherited from their father or their mother, but they would be missing some. And there are different ways that you can be a Turner syndrome female. And it's actually important to kind of know which you are, because some Turner syndrome females actually have a piece of a Y, and they have an increased risk of a type of cancer. So that would be an important thing to recognize. Or you could have 3 X chromosomes as a female, be XX. Or you could have 2 X chromosomes and a Y. So we usually associate 2 X's with being female chromosomally, and an X and a Y as being male chromosomally. These individuals have X and Y. They phenotypically have more male features than female, but with the extra X chromosome, they would have some breast development. And later we can talk about, how this would affect the brain and behavior and how one would identify. And there would be different Klinefelter syndrome individuals would feel differently about the gender that they felt most comfortable with. And then you can have 2 Y chromosomes. You'd be male, you'd just be a little taller. At conception, it's not as if half the population is XX chromosomally female and XY chromosomally male. There are other possibilities. And then there's this term I'd like to introduce now, but it will pop up in the future as well. Non-disjunctions could occur when we or our parents or whoever were making sex cells. Or it could happen after conception happens. So let's imagine this is me. All right, let's imagine I am conceived XY. All right, so chromosomally male. But the first cell division, there's a mistake. Half the chromosomes should go this way, half should go that way. Let's imagine they mess up. And both Ys go left. All right, and no Ys go right. So what does that mean? So this cell is now XYY, so it's got an extra Y, but it's male because it's got a Y.
Yeah.
This cell is my cell, but it doesn't have a Y. It's female.
Yeah, there's a whole box.
So, and forgive me, I'm just going to mute someone just in case there was some background noise there. If this happened, the first cell division, that would potentially mean that half of me could potentially be made of male cells with Y chromosomes and half female cells. But non-disjunctions could occur later. So let's imagine the first cell division occurs normally, and then it's in the second cell division that it occurs, this non-disjunction occurs. If that occurs, we have, and once again, if this is me, then half my cells are normal XY. A quarter of my cells are XYY, male, but with an extra chromosome. And then a quarter of my cells are X. So once again, I've got different populations of cells. The name for this individual would be a mosaic. Hence, just you're made of differing cells. And as you might guess where the rest of this video is going, or maybe the non-disjunction doesn't occur in the second cell division, maybe the third, maybe the fourth, maybe later. So there's no one rule that would apply, all right, because this could affect just a little bit of someone's body or a lot of someone's body. What would be the effects of this? Well, it would vary. So for example, hypothetically, imagine I have 1 male elbow and 1 female elbow. What would this do? Well, last I checked, male and female elbows are about the same. So nothing you probably wouldn't notice, all right? But now if this then by dumb luck, because these embryonic cells, what they're going to become, that hasn't been determined yet, it's dumb luck where they are in the embryo. Let's say this now affects gonad tissue. You could have an ovary and a testis. You could have a testis with ovarian tissue, or vice versa. You could have what's called an ovotestis, etc. So here we are chromosomally. And I just like to start off that, it is very common for individuals to have 2 X chromosomes and be XX, or an X and a Y and be XY. But there are other, possible scenarios. Okay. What time is it? Okay. Are we done? No, we're not done. You haven't even started yet, because we just done chromosomal gender. All right, we now go to step 2, all right, which is gonadal gender. Now, yeah, I'm sorry.
A question on that, the chromosomal gender. So the world, or even the United States, we've not done large scale testing to see what percent of the population is any one of those, like you've just described almost an infinite number of categories that we could fall in. So is there any estimate?
Well, so mosaicism is rare, and a lot of these are rare. And I did give you some percentages. So it's like 1 in 2,500 births, you know, or et cetera. But a colleague of mine, I'll just give a shout out to Professor Sam Dillon, because he had a way of putting it. I'm like, that's brilliant. So I'm just going to pass this on, but this isn't me. So you know what? It is brilliant, but it would be far more relevant after number 2. So forgive me. I'll get back to that in just a little bit. I'm sorry. Yeah.
Like 139.
Yeah. Yeah. And this is globally, like that. That's not like really, because it seems like it's like, no, you go to any country and it's about that. And that's like out in China, one of the ways that they can like look at whether there's like preferential abortion of female fetuses is because the statistics I gave does kind of seem to be standard throughout the world. I'm sorry.
But it evens out after certain.
Yeah. So the principle and just an explanation is sperm are pretty much DNA with a tail. That's all they are. An ovum has all this cytoplasm. It's a huge cell. It's about 1,000 times bigger. So if all you are DNA with a tail, and half of the sperm have a little Y chromosome, and half the sperm have a bigger X chromosome, and they race, then the ones which have the little Y chromosome just have a tiny bit of an edge. They're more likely to get to the ovum first, which is why at conception there's, in fact, some people, if you went to a fertility clinic and said, we really want a son for whatever reason, you could do what's called a sperm swim up, have a bunch of sperm swim up a tube and then get all the top ones. They're more likely to have Y chromosomes. Not a guarantee. I know someone who tried that and it didn't work. Or if you took the bottom, they'd be more likely to be the X parent. Yeah. Oh, did I answer your question?
Yeah.
Okay. Yes, I'm sorry, I get you. Yeah.
So there's this 30% advantage for conception, but you said that the miscarriages and infant deaths are more male.
Yeah.
Is that by a 51-49 or 64-20 or in terms of like miscarriages and infant deaths?
So by the time of birth, it's about 108 male infants to every 100 female. And then by the time of puberty, now there's infant deaths, but then you get into early puberty now, like you could have more accidents outside the home as being males.
So that implies roughly 20% miscarriages are 20% more male.
Yep.
Really?
Yeah, because so for example, I want to we'll get back to this just because there's more cool stuff. But like Duchenne's muscular dystrophy, it's an X-linked gene, so that's mostly male. Color blindness, mostly male. Hemophilia, mostly male. Women, if you have a mutation, you've got a second copy from your other parent to compensate for it. But males, you're out of luck. But there are a lot of mutations which are just so bad you can't be born alive. And so females, if you carry one of those, you probably didn't get that same mutation from your other parent. You're probably okay. But males, you wouldn't be born alive. Sorry, you had a question.
Wouldn't all of these chromosomal aberrations actually be very, very tiny percentages, extremely tiny?
Of the abnormal. So the ones that
Oh, it's Turner's, etc.
yes. And so I have a video if you're interested. So at the bottom, it says Klinefelter's 1 into every 2,500 to 5,000 female births. And for each of them, yes. So I'm still in Turner syndrome. XXX was 1 in 1,000. Klinefelter males 1 in 500 to 1,000. So yes, you can look that up and calculate. Okay. So next step, what gonads do you have? Well, the reason I'm going to emphasize this is because you think if you have a Y chromosome, you get testes, and if you have an X chromosome, 2 X's, you have ovaries, and it's a little more complicated than that. So how is this going to be determined? Well, if you're male, you have all of the genes you need to be female. All right. If you're female, you have all of the genes you need to be male except one. And actually, I just kind of lied because there's like an end around it. You could actually just double produce one of the genes and end up, being male. So in other words, genetically, males have all the genes you need to be female, and females have essentially all the genes you need to be male, maybe missing one. So why are there differences? And the reason is there's a difference between having a gene and using it. All right, you can have a gene, but you can just keep it off and not use it. So that begs the question, how do we decide which genes we turn on? And a rule that always applies once you're out of the bacteria range, no gene is turned on unless you have protein stick to the beginning of it first. So let's say here's a gene for gonad development in blue, here's a gene to make it a testis in red, here's a gene for ovary development in green. Notice that gene only gets active when blue proteins stuck to the beginning. If you didn't make those blue proteins, you would not make gonads, all right? And then to turn that gonad into either a testis or ovary, you would then either need red proteins to stick to the beginning of the red genes, or green proteins to stick to the beginning of the green genes. So activating a gene and making a copy is called transcription. These genes are called transcription factors. All right, so you don't turn on any of your genes unless you have transcription factors which bind to that gene. All right. So the Y chromosome doesn't have many genes, but it does have one called SRY that codes for a transcription factor. All right. So on the Y chromosome, there is the SRY transcription factor here, and that then will stick to this red gene, FGF9. It will stick to this gene, SOX9, and turn them on. Those genes will make gene product. They will, so it was paused. I'm like waiting for the action. I'm like, this is a boring video. All right, so it'll stick to those, and then those genes will be active. But women have those genes. But because they don't have the SRY, which will make the blue protein that sticks to the beginning, they will stay off at the early stages of fetal development in females. So now embryonic gonads start off the same. All of us made gonads before we decided whether they would be ovaries or testes. But now in some, the testes genes are being turned on because of the Y chromosome had this SRY gene. And in other individuals, it's not because they didn't have that SRY gene. All right. So this individual is XY chromosomally male. The Y chromosome has an SRY gene, which turns the gonad into a testis. This individual is gonadally male, chromosomally male, and gonadally male. This individual is XY, chromosomally male. But either their SRY doesn't work because it's mutated. Mutations happen all the time. I'm blood type O. I shouldn't be. I should be either A or B, but that gene is mutated. I have to eat oranges and limes and I need vitamin C. I have a gene to make vitamin C, as do you, but it's broken. It's mutated. Mutations, we're all mutants, all right? If this gene were to mutate or to move, now all of a sudden you have a Y chromosome, sure, but you're not going to turn on the testis development from the gonad. So you will develop as female. You will feel female. You may actually, and there are examples, be a famous female actress, a famous female model. All right, but when you go to have children, you find out you can't. The reason you're XY. All right, and I'm focusing on gender and not like reproductive system, because then this could be like why specifically can't they have children? We'd start getting into the witch ducts, atrophy, etc. But then I think we'd have trouble fitting in everything for this topic in the time. I said maybe SRY moves. Where could it move to? Oh, I don't know. Maybe an X. Okay. So crossing over happens where genes, jump from your mom's chromosome to your dad's. It's not an accident. You actually make them happen. Like when you're making sex cells, sperm and ova, if some of your mom's genes don't get cut and pasted onto your dad's chromosomes, that cell will die and never make a sex cell. So when I say they're moving, like not only does that happen, we make it happen as a requirement for gamete production. If the SRY accidentally moves to an X, now you can have someone inherit an X chromosome and be XX, chromosomally female, but they have an SRY gene, which will tell their gonads to become testes. So there are now cases where your gonadal gender might not match your chromosomal gender. Are we done? No, that was just one gene. There are a lot of genes that do that. So for example, SOX9, that was one of the ones that SRY turns on. SRY is a gene that's needed to be male, but so is SOX9. And actually, if you could turn on SOX9 without SRY, you could then be just as male with it. So, activating SOX9 could actually replace this. So this is also a really important. All right. So here is an individual, XY chromosomes, normal SOX9 levels. They are gonadally male. This individual, low SOX9 levels for whatever reasons. And we can vary in, like if we were to look at how many clotting factors there are in our blood. Some of us, our blood clots really quickly. We have high clotting factors. In fact, we're at risk of heart attack and stroke. You might go on blood thinners. But otherwise, we have problems with hemorrhage, right? Because we're making low levels. So you can make proteins, but at different levels. If you're making low levels of SOX9, well, now your gonads might develop into ovaries, even if you have an X chromosome. So once again, your gonads wouldn't match your chromosomes. This individual is XX, but some mutations duplicate a gene. So this individual, where they should have one SOX9 gene, has two. So they're getting extra SOX9, and so now their gonads develop into testes, even though they are XX. All right. Are we done? No, because there's more. All right. And just one thing, if I'll just show you my favorite site. If anyone has any curious about this or anything like heart disease, like you get test results back, there's a website which is like the main human genome website. So like when I have questions about genes, I teach genetics. This is the first place I go. It's called OMIM, Online Mendelian Inheritance in Man. You can donate even, apparently. But here you can like search for genes, like if you wanted to search for genes for heart disease or collagen or mutations. But feel free to look at like, a SOX9 and this, and it'll talk about like the variations in human populations, et cetera. Like, so this is like the genome site that doctors would use. So feel free to go there if you have, any questions and would like to go into greater detail on this. But all of these cause what's called sex reversal. So if you were to go in the website I just showed you and just type in the term sex reversal, all right, you'll see all of the genes that would cause your gonads to develop in a way opposite of what you would predict given the chromosomes. So SF1, fibroblast growth factor 9, the anti-Mullerian hormone, DAX, and Wnt. So all of these genes, all right, can change how your gonads develop. So there's chromosomal gender and there's gonadal gender. Are we done? No. All right. So the next step is somatic gender. And what I mean by somatic is there are cells of your body which are trying to make the sex cells. All right. Everybody else is called a somatic cell. All right. So if you're not like ovaries and testes undergoing meiosis making sex cells, everybody else is diploid and they're called somatic cells. So let's talk about somatic cells. All right. Now, I thought this was really cute. I think, anyway, so let me just explain. I was in a museum in Philadelphia and I was in the Greek statue section. And I decided, ooh, so like there was this picture of a statue of a child that you couldn't just tell by looking at like, oh, like maybe a boy, maybe a girl. And then there was like nearby, there was a statue of a woman, statue of a man. And I thought, you know what, I'm going to trace that child. And now in my animation, I am going to bend the lines. All right, so I'm starting off with this, and I'm going to bend the lines in a specific way. And I can take that outline of the child and make it look just like the man statue. Or, I'll bet you can see where this is coming, where we're going, I could then take the same child and just bend the same lines a little bit differently. And I could now then make that look just like the female statue. And I'm saying that because this is what estrogens and androgens do, like estrogen and testosterone. They affect somatic tissues, all right? They go all over the place. I'll be talking a lot about them. They're affecting vocal cords. They're affecting hair growth on your face, the breadth of your shoulders, muscle development. What do vocal cords have to do with making babies? They don't, really. What does facial hair have to do with making babies? They don't. All right, but because these sex hormones are affecting all of these somatic tissues, all right, then the individuals who are making high levels of androgens like testosterone, all right, their lines are being bent in a certain way. It's affecting the squareness of the jaw, the facial hair, the vocal cords. And then estrogens are doing the same in females. So now, if you were to look at an individual, like if I turned my back and someone came in the room and like left an envelope on my desk, and I say, "Ooh, was it a man or a woman?" And you say, "Oh, a man left a note for you," all right, and you're thinking, "Oh, because I saw the beard or whatever." But if I asked, like, what part of their reproductive system did you see? All right, you probably would have said I didn't, but nevertheless, I had a guess based on the somatic tissues because estrogens and androgens affect tissues all throughout the body. As you might imagine, we vary in everything. All right. And just there is no one part of human anatomy that is the exact same in every single individual. And when I talk about genes varying, genes obviously coded for by the DNA. What I'm about to say, this is true of women, but it would just have to take more time. So if you don't mind, let me just talk about men. Men can say, I will mutate every single nucleotide of the 3.3 billion in the human genome in at least one sperm I make today. So does the human form vary? Yes, because the code that makes humans, it varies so much so that men will change every single spot on that code in at least one sperm today. All right, women, same thing, it just takes much longer. Okay, so we vary. So the genes which are involved in making testosterone, making its receptor, I'll get actually into them. They're fascinating. They can mutate. All right, so some don't work to the same level of efficiency or whatever. So if a male has an XY chromosome and testes, but is not making as much testosterone or the cells are not as responsive to it, now they are going to have less of that facial hair development, square jaw, et cetera, that they would otherwise have. All right. In the same, and there are terms for, some of those conditions. Same thing with females. If she has too much androgen, so the androgen, like testosterone, is causing the squareness of the jaw, the facial hair growth, et cetera. I'm about to go into how this would happen. If she's exposed to excess androgen, now her cells are reacting the way, cells often would in a male, developing a deeper voice, et cetera. Now, we can talk about voice, et cetera, but even then on the reproductive organs, some penises are so small that they resemble a clitoris. Clitorises can enlarge and resemble a small penis. These folds, which should fuse to make a scrotum, can remain unfused and resemble labia. Labia majora can fuse and resemble a scrotum. All right, and so some of these can be extensive to the point where at birth someone is recognized, oh, this is a baby boy, this is a baby.
Physical appearance important. 19-year-old Joseph Clayton.
All right, so I'm sorry, I'm just going to mute someone in the background if that's okay. All right, well, thank you for muting me. All right, so let me go in through like a whole variety of those things and then talk about estrogen and testosterone, which are just fascinating. We could talk about them forever. So one of the really common things, first of all, all right, I want to ask a personal question. This might be too personal, so if this is too personal, don't answer. Is anyone right now on steroids? Is anyone on steroids? If we check their blood, would there be steroids? Anyone want to volunteer? Okay. All right. For people at home, no one raised their hand. No one at home is volunteering. All right. So I'm going to stop this lecture. I'd like all of you to rush to the hospital because there's something wrong. All right. You should. And if you didn't raise your hand, it's probably because there's something you don't get. So this is a steroid. We call it cholesterol, and we call it a steroid because it has this ring of carbon structures. So anything that has that is called a steroid. From cholesterol, we make stuff. All right. Some of the things we make are hormones. All right. So some of these are androgens. All right. And I'm going to be talking about this. So androstenedione, testosterone. So these are steroids. I've just tweaked cholesterol a little bit. And notice now here's testosterone. Here's an OH. I'm going to tweak that and then turn it into estrogen. So the way you make estrogen is to make testosterone first. Okay. So both men and women have both estrogen and testosterone, as I will get into. But now, if we have glands over our kidneys called adrenal glands, all right? We turn cholesterol into these things which are weak androgens, weak estrogens, et cetera, all right? And it is possible to make more than what most people make. So there is a disorder known as congenital adrenal hyperplasia, where you make too much androgen from your adrenal glands. Once again, these are the things over the kidneys. In a male, maybe you wouldn't notice as much. But in a female now, she, instead of getting cortisone, instead of making cortisone, which these glands would normally make, you're making like a testosterone type of thing. So now, if this is a mother carrying a female fetus and she has CAH, her female fetus is getting testosterone the way it would if it was a male fetus. All right. If she has a twin brother in utero and they're so close to each other in utero that their placentas are partially fused, she's getting some of the testosterone that he's making in his fetal testes. All right. So she's getting some extra testosterone. In cattle, there's actually a name for that called a free marten. If you said, "Oh, I have a horse, I have a cow," that's a free marten. What it means, it's a female, but because its placenta was partially fused to a male sibling, it got the effects of testosterone in it. Maybe the woman is taking anabolic steroids. All right, which once again would expose the female fetus to more androgen. Or maybe this girl, when she's in adolescence, she has CAH. She takes extra anabolic steroids. Or maybe she has a mutation in her ovaries, because once again, her ovaries make testosterone and then turn that into estrogen. But if now you have a faulty enzyme for that last step, then her ovaries are making testosterone and then she releases testosterone in her blood. And so now, once again, in males, from the testes, this would cause, hair growth and a deepening of the voice and a squarer jaw. She would now get this as well. So I want to talk about estrogen and testosterone. It's fascinating, but just kind of the sum of all of this is our somatic gender. When you look at the cells which aren't making sex cells, all right, like how broad your shoulders are, or the pelvis, like when your two pubic bones come together, do they come together like this, like they would in a male? Do they come together like this the way they would in a female? Do you have hair on your face? Do you have a deep voice? These are somatic tissues, and it is, I'm sorry, I'm just going to just mute a couple. It is estrogens and testosterones which are causing these changes, and we can vary in ways that I'm about to say. All right, so somatic gender may not match your gonadal gender. Like if I'm making testosterone, but I can't perceive it, all right, well, then I'm not going to take on many of the attributes that I would have. So I have a whole bunch of videos, probably more than we can get to. So I'm just kind of hit the highlights of these if you don't mind. I know we often think of estrogen as female and testosterone as male. They're not. So males make estrogen. All right, it's one of the active forms of testosterone inside cells. So a lot of cells will then take testosterone and then turn it into estrogen. So estrogen is important in males. All right, so for males, all right, estrogen is helping to make you who you are. And a lot of times we look at like levels of estrogen in males as being affecting overall health, as I'll be getting into in a little bit. Now, if estrogen is part of your normal metabolism, being exposed to things in the environment, which then either look like estrogen or disrupt this. All right, there are things in plastics, and this is an issue with women as well. There are things in plastic like DES, which I'll get back to, pharmaceutical products, which are estrogenic. All right, so you as a male could now be exposed to more estrogen than you otherwise would. Let's say you're eating a lot of plants that have estrogen, like soy, you're taking phytoestrogens, you're drinking a lot of alcohol. Alcoholics often develop breasts to a greater degree because of the extra estrogen. You're taking a drink of water. How well is your water being filtered? I mean, if you live near dairy farms, is there extra estrogen in the water that you're drinking? We all take, pharmaceutical products. Then we urinate, we flush it down the toilet. But does that mean that the breakdown products of birth control pills and other things are now in the water that we drink? So in other words, so for males, what estrogen levels do you have? That's relevant. Okay. Now, what I just said will introduce a song. What I'm about to say, this is more true of estrogen receptors than testosterone receptors. So it turns out, actually, you know what? I'm sorry. Let me just play you this. Make sure this. I should still be open there. I guess not. Okay. So there is a term which we use in genetics known as promiscuous. So promiscuous, it's a genetics term. Okay. And we'll just listen a second. I swear.
If you're true to just one partner, you're
Sorry.
all monogamous. Estrogen receptors inside every one of us. You're promiscuous. You're promiscuous. Receptors are specific. They need a perfect fit. But if something is similar, you'll interact with it. You're promiscuous.
But the point is, so now you can get something from a plant, all right, like soy, all right, but it looks enough like estrogen that it binds to estrogen receptors and then it will turn on genes in both males and females. So it's estrogenic. So the level of estrogen in your body might be different from what your body intended. All right. There are pharmaceutical products that do this. There are plastics which do this, like BPA. Like you may like look, it's like, oh, you know, buy this brand of baby bottle. They are BPA free. What does that mean? There was an estrogen that was investigated on whether or not to give to pregnant women called DES. Oh, I'm sorry, BPA came first. They're like, ooh, you know, we want to give some women estrogen. Would this be a good synthetic form of estrogen? And they decided, no, let's not use BPA, let's use DES. And then DES that they use caused some birth defects, so they stopped that. But anyway, then BPA, they said, ooh, but we do like this chemical. It's really good in plastic, right? It gives plastic a lot of the, you know, characteristics that we like. So a lot of the plastics that, you know, we have, they have something that was originally designed as an estrogen. But now you have this water ball as in the really hot sun, or you put something in the microwave. Now, if that starts breaking this stuff up, you could now be ingesting something that is estrogenic, which will trigger this, male or female. So this, and women can increase your risk of breast cancer. In males now, your risk of estrogen are higher because once again, of this promiscuous estrogen receptor. Estrogen and testosterone receptors, here's just real quick. Oh, love to talk about them more, is they stick to DNA. So remember I said transcription factors, all right? Estrogen and testosterone with their receptors. So what happens is when you make estrogen, when you make testosterone, both men and women make both, these hormones go into your cells, they go into the nucleus with the receptor, and they stick to DNA. In fact, there is a sequence in DNA that the estrogen receptor binds to. Here it is, guanine. So if you remember your, you know, biology, GGTCA, this is where estrogen receptors bind. So we can identify what genes does estrogen turn on because they have a sequence. All right, the estrogen receptor sticks to genes that has this DNA sequence. Testosterone has this. And so when we make estrogen, all right, then we turn on genes that would otherwise be off. But if you're exposed to an environmental estrogen, you're turning on genes that you would intended to leave off, all right, but now they are on. If this were a lecture on breast cancer, which it isn't, we would then talk about risk of breast cancer being anything that's estrogenic, any, you know, other forms of estrogen, any chemicals that look like estrogen, they now are going to increase cell division in tissues like the breast, and then increase your risk of cancer. Okay. And then it's more complicated because estradiol is the major estrogen. It's not the only one, though. There's also what's called estrone, made by the gonads and the adrenal glands. Yeah, it's primarily a precursor to the first one that I said, but some of it does go into the blood as well, and it works a little differently. So there are estrogens. It's a group. Estradiol is the major one, but there's estrone as well. And then there's estriol, especially during pregnancy. So when you start saying how might one individual vary from another, well, how much estradiol are you making and where? And how much estrone are you making and where? How much estriol are you making and where? So you can now see, you know, this enormous potential for us to vary. Androstenedione, and others of its forms, they're weak androgens and weak estrogens. So we often refer to them as, quote, male hormones, the androgens. But some of them, like testosterone, would be like an androgen, but other ones are like weak androgens, but also at the same time weak estrogens. And so once again, how much of these are you making in your adrenal glands? All right. And so these are having an effect. And then there's this one. So remember that estrogen and testosterone come from cholesterol. There's another thing that comes from cholesterol, which isn't a hormone, so it's not estrogen and it's not testosterone. However, it can bind to the receptor and affects how efficiently then estrogen is. So it does modify estrogen action. So adipose in your body, how much do you have? Do you have the enzymes to turn this into something which affects how much estrogen you're making, et cetera? Now, the reason that we should worry about things like this is because estrogen is incredible. All right, for both men and women, it's just an important hormone. I mean, it's decreasing your risk of heart disease. It's decreasing your risk of asthma, it's decreasing your risk of depression. So we could talk about, all of, I'm going to talk about gender and the brain presently. But before that, your brain makes estrogen receptors. So when there's estrogen in your blood, your brain wants some. Not all of it, but especially some parts. Your brain says, estrogen, come to this part of the brain and turn on genes that otherwise would have been off. Same thing for testosterone. All right. In fact, your brain makes some of its own neurosteroids. So not only does your brain say, I want to be affected by the estrogen and testosterone coming from the gonads and the adrenal glands, it says, heck, I'm going to make some of my own. All right. So these are important. And if you want to understand health, what is estrogen doing to blood vessel walls and to the heart to affect our risk of heart disease? It lowers it. So estrogen is very good. How is it estrogen affecting the immune system? Oh, that's the thing about these hormones, estrogen and testosterone. They're not just affecting like sex stuff. Like they're affecting facial hair and this, you're affecting heart disease risk. They're just fascinating. But we kind of have a topic for today, so I'd like to get back to that. But we should care. Like men should care about your estrogen levels. Women should care about your testosterone levels because they affect so many other aspects of health. Like after menopause, someone will actually go to their doctors and take testosterone supplements because they don't feel like themselves. Once again, testosterone is a female hormone, just like estrogen is a male hormone. And some women feel the absence of it. I want to go back to how I used to feel. I'd like testosterone again. So you can turn testosterone into estrogen. You can turn it into another thing called dihydrotestosterone, or DHT, by these genes alpha reductase. They sometimes don't work. Let me give you the most extreme example. You can have boys, all right, which are chromosomally male, have gonads, will make testosterone, but they don't turn testosterone into DHT. So that means when they are born, they look like girls. Their penis looks like a clitoris. Their scrotal folds haven't fused. They look like baby girls. They are raised as girls until puberty hits. And then their testes start kicking in testosterone. And in a short number of years, they go from looking like fairly average female infants and children into fairly average adolescent boys. Now that's an extreme example, but just to show you how many steps, so there's testosterone, but to make external genitalia look male, you have to turn testosterone into another thing, DHT, right? And if you don't do that step, well, then there's development in you, which happens a little differently than it otherwise does. All right. Once again, testosterone is also a female hormone. And so I have a little bit on that. And there was a question. Let me just get to, yeah.
Refer to the effect of the brain. Are you specifically talking about the pituitary?
Ooh, can I get to that's like the next one.
Okay.
Yeah. So I'm almost an estrogen. Yeah, that's the very next thing. So there's all of this. And then once again, so testosterone only works because there's an androgen receptor that it binds to. So does your androgen receptor look just like mine, or does it vary? We have variations on our genes for hair color. We have variations on our gene, for blood type, et cetera. Do you have variations in your androgen receptor genes, et cetera? So, so the answer is, yeah, there's all kinds of variations here. And, these are interesting when it comes to gender, but also like you might get the sequence because it's affecting your risk of prostate cancer or something else. So and once again, if you ever once again look up androgen receptor here, and at the bottom they'll have like all of the variations can be this in this family, this trait results, etc. Okay, are we done? No. All right. And I'd like to get to the last big one and then start to wind up. But this is the one that's most difficult to talk about. And by that, I say, I'm a scientist and a biologist. And what I like to say is, like if anyone, ever says, I'm not sure that's true. I mean, good. I mean, you're not supposed to believe me. Don't trust single word I say. If you trust me, you're doing it wrong. That's not why we're here. We're scientific thinkers. You should say, what's the evidence? All right, and I should say, here it is, or direct you to it. And then if you say, the evidence doesn't convince me, I think I'd like to test this, good for you. All right, scientists are wrong. All right, the only way we advance scientific knowledge is if you say, like, we should study this more, we should study another variable. So belief never comes into this at all. So by all means, let's go into this. But when you study things, all right, one of the great things that we can do is study animals like mice or et cetera. But if you start to deal with like things like the human brain, well, now obviously like experimentation is off. Like if you can experiment with something with mice, does this increase the risk of prostate cancer? You can just go to all these mice, give them something, and then measure that. But if you're looking at now the human brain, much harder. And so now you're dealing with case studies with a doctor or this family. And so when you publish a paper, instead of this is based on 1,000 mice, this is based on the study of 12 individuals. This is this based on the study after death of 3 brains. All right. So and just as a scientist, I would, you can't experiment on humans, obviously, but to have really good confidence in things, I just like bigger numbers and better statistics. So all of this then, becomes a little harder to study, and I'm just presenting, this is the best we know up till now. All right. So the brain, are male and female brains the same? They aren't. All right. Now that's really not surprising because like our respiratory systems are. Like in males, this tends to stick out a little bit more. The vocal cords tend to be a little thicker. Yeah, like it doesn't really matter. I mean, the respiratory systems are mostly the same. There's just a couple of differences. Skeletal systems, are they the same? No, they're mostly the same. But in women, the pubic bones come together like this, the males come together like this. You could identify a skeleton based on gender. You could identify a respiratory system based on gender. You could identify a brain based on gender. Now it's hard, all right? You'd have to know what you're looking for, all right? But there are parts which vary a little bit, all right? Just like, you could identify a skeleton as being male or female. There's a couple parts where corpus callosum tends to be a little bit bigger in women than it is in men. The one that I think I have a picture of here, I know it's in the other one. Oh, so this is one half of the thalamus, this is the other half of the thalamus. In women, not only are they more likely to be connected, but the connection's likely to be bigger. In males, the connection's likely to be a little smaller. In fact, they may not be connected, these two halves of the thalamus. And there's a bunch of places. They're not big. All right, just like if I were to, when I teach the respiratory system, I don't say, oh, we're going to talk about women's respiratory systems, then we're going to talk about men. No, we just talk about the respiratory system at the end and say, oh, there's a couple things that vary a little between males and females. All right, it wasn't the major function of the system. Same thing applies to the brain. Most of the brain is essentially the same between males and females. But nevertheless, if you said, like, for whatever reason, I'd like to try to identify the gender of this brain, there are places you could look at, it's a little bigger in males. This one's a little bigger in females, etc. If you were dealing with patients, all right, when people get sick, all right, like when their hearts get sick, there can be variations in how people's hearts get sick, how many people's lungs get sick, etc. When we deal with mental disease and, a number of issues with mental health, there are some scenarios where most of your patients are going to be male. And then there are other situations where most of your patients are going to be female. All right. Now, remember, the hormones that we're making, they go to the brain. The brain invites them. Heck, the brain even makes some of their own. All right. And they vary. All right. In women, the hormones are cycling monthly. After menopause, they drop off. In men, the hormones are varying, but they tend to vary daily. All right. So there's all of these aspects. Not only can brains vary, there's what are called critical periods. All right. So what is the effect of, say, testosterone in the brain? And I'd like to start with testosterone because fetal testes make testosterone, fetal ovaries stay quiet. All right. So one of the differences between infants when they're born is that the body and the brain of a male infant will have had the effects of steroid hormones, while a female infant would not have, because the ovaries didn't make any significant hormone during fetal development, but the testes they did. And they do what's called a critical period. What are the effects of testosterone on a brain? Well, when? All right, because there are certain windows where you have a chance to turn on genes and change development, and then that door will close. So testosterone during this window of fetal development will have an effect that it will never again have. All right, you can't, after birth, replace the testosterone that wasn't, present during embryonic development. They're what are called critical periods. Not just in this, like, so for example, I apologize, this is rule, but it's like ancient psychology studies. But like if you take a cat's eye and cover an eye for a certain in a certain window, you can take the patch off. It won't see out of that eye ever again. Right, the eye's fine, anatomically it's perfect, but it needed to get stimuli in the certain developmental period called a critical period. And since it didn't, it developed differently than it otherwise would have. So this doesn't just apply to gender, there's lots of critical periods. So there's one before birth, all right? And then there's actually something that we don't know much about. All right, so between after week 7 and peaking between weeks 12 and 18. But then also in infants between 1 and 3 months, there's something referred to as mini puberty, where infant testes are producing a little testosterone here. So there are changes which are happening during what are called critical periods. And then so testosterone afterwards wouldn't have the same effects. Okay. Now, one of the things I throw out is we live in a chemical world, all right? And there are things that look like estrogens. There are things that look like testosterones, and they're in plastics, all right? We're all ingesting plastics. If you live near farms, all right, the cattle, they urinate. They've got hormones, all right, and this ends up in our systems. If you live in a city, then there's, birth control pills. There's morning after pills, and then that's in the drinking water. What does this do? Well, on humans, we're not quite sure yet. Like we can link some to increasing risk of breast cancer, et cetera. But we definitely know with fish. In fish, there are so many fish which are born that are male, but they have some ovarian tissue that are making like hormones of egg laying. All right, because they're just, they're being affected by hormones that look like estrogen. Okay. Before I get to the last topic, when an infant is born, very often a question which is asked is, is it a boy or a girl? There are cases where, the family and the doctor's answer is, I'm not quite sure. All right. Where, once again, a small penis looks a lot like a clitoris. A large clitoris looks like a lot like a penis because they develop from the same tissue. We all make this one tissue that will either become the penis or the clitoris, depending on what hormones it gets. And there are times where you're thinking, I'm not quite sure. All right. And so whether it be the penis and the clitoris or the labia, whether they fuse to make a scrotum, whether it be the urethra where that is exiting, that can vary in infants. All right. And so this infant would say has ambiguous genitalia. And then the question then comes up, well, then what does the family and the doctors do? Well, they talk. All right. And I'm just saying that they say, all right, well, we think that there's more female development than male or vice versa. We think that it would be easier to construct female genitalia than male or vice versa. And so here are some options. We could do hormone therapy. We could do this. And so it's experts in the family, which, often steer a course. All right. But there have been cases where infants, or where individuals later, let's say they there was a really famous case a long time ago where there was a boy born, was about to be circumcised. There was an accident, much of the penis was removed. So they decided, let's kind of do reconstructive surgery and we'll make this individual look like an infant girl, raise them as a girl, everything will be fine. Well, it wasn't. Like the individual felt they felt male. They didn't feel female, and they ended up just struggling. They ended up in therapy. They ended up taking their life from this. But the point is, people are making a decision, all right, with the best intentions, but the individual later in life may feel that that decision wasn't best for them. All right. And this would not be something that I could speak of, like, so this would be like a case by case, family by family discussion. The last topic I'd like to broach is now we start like if we're talking about, well, in addition to just brain stuff like stuttering, right? More males will stutter than females. Like that's easy to study. You could look at number of people suffering from depression. Now, if you were to ask questions like, all right, who are you attracted to? All right, you know, what gender you associate with an identity. Well, once again, I get less comfortable because now we can't use animals to the same degree as a model. And so our just statistics aren't going to be good. And obviously with humans, now there's culture, there's how families raise, and so there's all of these variables. So once again, just as a biologist who would like to say, here's a biological question, here's an answer. Once you throw in all of the human variables, you know, it's harder to get that answer. We do know that there are plenty of animals, including bonobo chimps. So there are two kinds of chimpanzee. Common ones have the peach faces. Bonobo chimps have the black faces. Two different species, if you know. Bonobo chimps, they are famous for just, there is no species on Earth which has a more varied sexual repertoire than human beings, but bonobo chimps are number 2. So it's interesting that the species on Earth that shares most of our DNA, the chimps are tied in that, they also have heterosexual relationships, homosexual relationships, bisexual relationships. And there seem to be genes which can affect attraction and or gender identity. And by that, I mean, the way the study would be done is that if you have a bunch of people volunteer for a study, and you say, all right, now fill out a form and categorize yourself as, let's say, heterosexual, bisexual, homosexual, whatever. And now let's look at sequences in this gene. All right, so now we're going to take your DNA and this gene on this chromosome, and then we tend to see variations, but this variation is more likely to be associated with individuals who classify with this type of attraction and less likely with this one. And then you do all of these statistical packages, and then someone then publishes a paper later that says, oh, I did it and I'm not quite sure I got the same result. And then someone publishes another thing, yes, I confirm this. And so psychology and genetics paper, I mean, you'll just find hundreds and hundreds of studies where people say, just can we, on the questionnaires which were filled out, can we associate that, this tends to go with this form of the gene versus that form of the gene, et cetera. And once again, don't believe a single word I say. Just take these genes. This is a liver enzyme that converts one steroid to another. Copy it and go into that human genome site. Just at the bottom, you'll see references where you'll see all of the scientific papers that publish this. I mean, by all means, research this on your own. Don't take my word for it. Absolutely anything. And so, so studies look like this. All right, so when you read these studies, it's just a whole host of researchers, who are experts in the field, which are then publishing in refereed scientific journals. These are hard things to publish. Like they wouldn't accept something from me. They say like, "Who are you? You don't know what you're doing." So like they would say like, "No, you have to be an expert in your field." And like, "Oh no, we won't accept this for publication. You have to go back and do more controls or et cetera." So once something is in a scientific journal, you can say, "Oh, I'm starting to have more confidence in that." The point that I'm just trying to say is, I can't say that we know, like if you were to ask, why am I attracted to this type of person? Why do I have this gender attraction? We don't know. Is it environment? Is it genes? Which gene is it? But there are genes which seem to be involved. Maybe not in each person equally, it's just like heart disease, all right? Like, so one person might have heart disease only for genetic reasons, another person only for environmental. In a second person, it might be genetic reasons, but a different gene. In another person, it might be environmental reasons, but a different environmental factor. So this is complicated. So none of these are the answer, which there are two forms of the gene that determine who you're, but they are genes which at least studies have pointed to as playing a role in these. Now, let me just finish this. So with this, I don't know whether you want to do experiments on mice or not, but you can do experiments. Like, can we encourage female mice to perform behaviors which we typically associate with males by giving them hormones, by blocking this gene? All right, so if we block this hormone, or we give that hormone, and we say female mice tend to do this behavior more, male mice tend to do this more. So then biologically, from limited animal studies, I wouldn't say you can automatically apply everything we learn from mice to humans, but certainly some aspects of gender seem to be capable of being modified by hormones at different times. And I'm sorry, you had a question.
How would you explain hermaphrodite?
Ooh, so the term hermaphrodite is difficult in that. And once again, I apologize. Like, just last summer, it became to my attention that the things that I've been calling my entire life gypsy moths, now the preferred term is spongy moths, because gypsy was not a term that Romani used to describe themselves. And so they felt that, so in derogatory. And I now believe that the term hermaphroditism might also then be in that. So there used to be what was called pseudo-hermaphroditism. So if I was a pseudo-hermaphrodite, I would produce sperm, all right, but that I might have some attributes which would be less typically male and more typically female, like breast development or something. But that would be what's called pseudo-hermaphroditism. True hermaphroditism, which is rare, would mean that I actually have both ovarian and testicular tissue. All right. So it's not one physiological condition. And if I were to go back to the video I'd had on somatic gender, so there are a number of conditions which would cause, say, a male to have less testosterone or respond to it less than he otherwise could. And so formerly, like, a lot of this might be referred to as pseudo-hermaphroditism or with females. But once again, I think that many would prefer to say, instead of using that term, let's use congenital adrenal hyperplasia for this one, for this scenario, et cetera. And so this is about the time that we usually wrap up. There's so much more that we could say, whether it be in other animals or humans. So really, I just wanted to introduce a number of topics. The big point is gender involves multiple steps. There's a chromosomal step. All right. And while, the majority of people either have an XX or an XY, lots of humans are conceived with different, combinations of chromosomes, and mosaicism can result in differences after that. After chromosomal gender, the question is, do your embryonic gonads develop into ovaries or testes? It usually follows that if you're XY, your gonads develop into testes, if you're XX, into ovaries, but that doesn't have to happen. There's a number of genes, and if you were to type in sex reversal, you would see a whole bunch of them where a mutation in this gene would then change the gender that you would have predicted from chromosomes. And then once you have gonads, if there's testosterone, if you don't make it, if you don't make the enzyme that converts it into the other form, the DHT, if your receptor doesn't work too well, that's going to affect how your cells respond. If you're not supposed to make testosterone, but your adrenal glands are overproducing it, or you take anabolic steroids, then that would then affect gender as well. And then the stuff on the brain, the brain is the most complex structure in the known universe. We don't know what's going on there, and the brain's making its own hormones, and so this is complicated. And as a biologist, I mean, we know from the bird talks, we're constantly talking about gender. I mean, look at the Baltimore Orioles. The males look like this, they're singing this, the females look like this. Gender touches on so many aspects of biology. So it's wonderful, it's important, obviously allows for the next generation, but also really complicated. But then that's also wonderful to, study, this and all of its complications as well. Thank you all so much for coming. I'll ask if there are any questions in a second. Just a reminder that there's the holiday in a week, and then we're going to do a couple of international wildlife things, and then we'll get back in the end of July into August, more into the human body and how that works. Does anybody have any questions I can help you with? Oh, yeah. Oh, yeah. Thank you so very much. The quote was, if this were a room full of students who hadn't yet started to reproduce yet, you could say, well, I'm male, like, so I look male, I feel male, I must be XY. There's a small chance you weren't, all right, because individuals who are XX, they might say that, all right. And the same thing if you say, oh, I'm female, I feel female, I'm nothing other than female, so I must be XX. Not necessarily the case, and so we often assume that just once we feel a certain gender or have a specific somatic gender that we can infer the chromosomes. We can't always do that. And so that was the thing that even if you haven't started to reproduce yet, you could ask the question, wait, what are my chromosomes? I've never had them tested. Thank you for reminding me. Yeah.
Some of the trisomy that you mentioned earlier, how are they on the second generation? Do they have normal children? Are they sterile?
It varies. Let me give you two. So if I'm XXY, now when I'm making sex cells, I have too many. And then I tell them split up into 2 equal piles. That means I'm going to have some normal sperm and some abnormal sperm. And so then by dumb luck, my kids could get the normal ones or the abnormal ones. All right. Sometimes, and this is with Down, there is actually a form of Down syndrome which is hereditary. And you say, how can that be? Because a little piece of the extra chromosome is stuck on another one. So like now you have like chromosome 9, I'll make one up, that has a little bit of chromosome 21 stuck to it. And so it's not just dumb luck anymore. Like half your kids are going to get this one. So it would vary. So they can have normal children. They could have children which are affected with abnormal numbers of chromosomes. Mm-hmm. Anybody else?
One more.
Sure.
Are those, videos that you use, are those just open to public?
Yeah. So my YouTube channel is Dr. Jan 41, DRJAHN 41, and it's supposedly free. YouTube charges you ads and stuff. This isn't me, so like I've never earned a penny from this. So just so you know that it's not like go to my YouTube channel. And so if you really wanted to, so you could type in anything here. Like if you typed in gender, you'd probably come up with the playlist. All right, so if I did that, I'll bet you I could. Yeah, it should be, there's a whole bunch of gender. There we go. So there's the playlist on gender there. But then I teach different classes, and the videos that I've shown you tonight, some of them are in the AMP2 folder when I teach that. There's the reproductive system, which you didn't see much of, and gender at the bottom. But also I teach genetics, and there was a little from there as well, when like the flies and the birds, et cetera, was in the genetics.
I can think of a few politicians.
Well, the thing is, and just I'll just make one little plug is, I mean, there's so much that I don't know. Like I've spent my life studying biology, and I still like I'll just learn something like, wow, I didn't know that. Like there's just so much to know. And I would just say in general, it could be heart disease, it could be asthma, it could be gender, it could be climate change, it could be like a whole bunch of things. Any portrayal that it's easy. We're like, oh, heart disease, it's your cholesterol. It's not that cholesterol isn't involved, but it's just much more complicated than that. So that would be my thought, that like just, this is important stuff to understand for health, for everything. And it's complicated. So by all means, put the time in and try to understand it. And any portrayal that you hear that, oh, it's easy, this is the answer, it's probably not deep enough. That would be my thought.
Thank you.
Thank you. Have a wonderful evening.